Video games. If I were to ask all of you right now to raise your hand if you played a video game, it's more than likely that the majority of you will raise your hand and say you played it. And that's so. It seems that video games are abundant in our society. And with this, it causes many of people to have different feelings when playing video games. I know I walked into my brother's room last time and he was just screaming, "Oh, you camper, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to get you." You know, this is a feeling of aggression, something that comes about when, with many different variables, many different situations. But with video games, we see this quite often. There's actually a major controversy, the video game Doom in 1983, where many parents and researchers started to see that kids were being a lot more aggressive, and this would come with the increased graphics of violence and blood and gore in video games. And with that, I'm here to argue that the violence portrayed in video games contributes to the aggressiveness in society, and it contributes to the aggressiveness in youths in society. And I'm going to tell you three things. My supporting claims are that the amount of violent video games that children are exposed to has increased over the years. I'm going to reveal to you the different studies and how this affected different children to be aggressive. And I'm also going to reveal to you how different children reacted when they had influence over video games. A few things to define before we start are violence and aggression. While they seem like similar terms, they do differ just a bit. Violence and aggression both talk about different offensive actions that could come about from any kind of situation, while aggression actually provides a feeling of hostility, especially when you talk about the aggression in a person being more of an adjective. To start, I'm going to talk about the amount of violent video games that children are exposed to has increased over the years. Now, according to some research done in 2005 to 2008 by Michael Ward, he's a professor of economics at the University of Texas. The sales in video games have gone up by 1%, and actually the crime rates have decreased by 0.03%. And while this does go in the opposite direction from what I'm claiming, his research had actually gone on the fact that he didn't take into account a lot of different variables on crime rate. So the comparison between the two should be inconclusive. But the main point is that video game sales have increased by 1%. And there was actually a report also called the 10th Annual Media-Wise Video Game Report Card, in which the National Center for Media and the Family found that 70% of students from the 4th to 12th grade in the nation have played an M-rated game. And this is even told in Grand Theft Auto, where last year, in 2013, for a more recent statistic, it had sold over 1 billion units in 24 hours, showing how much abundance we have of video games now. And the next claim is playing video games provokes aggression in youth. A study conducted by Craig A. Anderson, leading researcher in this subject. He has a PhD in Stanford University, and he's a department chair of philosophy at Iowa State University, where he took over 500 students, ranging from elementary school to college, and split them into groups, each playing a different video game. Each video game had a different type of violence. It's a different level of violence. And in the end, they had them play a game where you had a clicking match against your opponent. And if you won, you got to choose what their punishment is. And the punishment would be a different level of aggressiveness, a different level of noise that they would get. They were just playing against a computer, so nothing actually happened, but it showed that the teens that had played the more aggressive video games, they actually chose a higher noise level. So they tended to be a bit more aggressive. And this actually just leads to mostly the fact that in the short term, in the couple of minutes after, they do act more aggressively. And this was even brought up in a court case by the Supreme Court, Brown versus Entertainment Merchants Association, where they stated that they show at best some correlation between exposure to violent entertainment and minuscule real-world effects. And it only applies to the few minutes after playing a video game. So even the Supreme Court has seen that this is a very minuscule effect just for short term. For the long term, there isn't very many effects, but it can be seen that it does provide more feeling of hostility in teens and youth. Even Brad Bushman, a leading researcher in the area of and professor of communication psychology at Ohio State University, can be quoted as saying that people have a steady diet of playing these video games may seem to have a real may see the world as hostile and violent, and the results suggest that there could be a cumulative effect. This just shows that it gives them ideas and it provides them to be more violent. And my third supporting claim is that youths are prone to a misunderstanding of harm and pain. There was actually a 10-year-old boy that died in March 10, 2008 because he had the wrong idea that he could stick his head into a sandbox, and his friends actually helped him to do this. They just imitated a cartoon, but this could be seen as just the ideas that they get from different media, even video games. And there was a teen couple in Colorado that actually beat up the girl's little sister while practicing moves from a popular game called Mortal Kombat. And they actually beat the girl to death, mostly because they were drunk, but this actually shows that the ideas that they got from the games were imitatable in real life, and they were shown to have an effect on them. And in conclusion, basically what we can see is that video games do have an effect. I've shown you that they have increased over the years. They provoke aggression in students and they provoke aggression in youth, and there have been real cases, while extreme, they do provoke ideas for a long-term effect and hostility. And I argued that the violence portrayed in video games does contribute to the aggression in youth. Thank you. That was really confident going in there. You have it on your head, and it's just like, it doesn't come out you want it to.
All right, Alan, the proposition is clearly identified, and I thought that you started labeling your secondary claims effectively, except that the first point is a claim and the second two are not claims. They're just identifications of what the subject matter is. You need to make inferences on those other points. Internally, the signposting was a little bit inconsistent. I thought the first and the third points were labeled very clearly. The middle point, I think we just got, you started talking about that issue. The evidence that you have, you've got a lot of examples, but the examples don't always seem to be fitting what you're talking about. The kid getting his head stuck in the sand sounds like it's a reaction to a cartoon, not video games, and the Mortal Kombat people sound like drunken idiots as opposed to people who are high on aggression, and you do need to give us source citations on those things. I don't doubt that those examples probably are real, but don't forget to mention where you read about them. The studies that you cite, it's a little confusing to me because you cite a couple of studies that sound like they've got the mildest amount of impact imaginable. There's been a 1% increase in video game sales. Holy criminy! Ooh, that's scary. 1% increase. That sounds ridiculous. There's got to be better information about the growth of video games. And if you have a time period that you're talking about, it's got to be not a factor of 1%, it's got to be hundreds of percentage points, and that doesn't seem to me like that would be a hard piece of information to find, especially when you've got the example about how quickly Grand Theft Auto, whatever it is, 5 sold, and became so popular within a short period of time. What you do need is a little bit more information about the violence in the games and how frequently it occurs and affects people. The one study that seems to connect the violence in the games to aggression is one where they're playing against machines and they increase the amount of sound punishment that somebody would get. Okay, well, it's interesting. There's not really explanation of what the quantifiable impact would be, how much that aggression is going on. And then right after that, you follow that up with, and in the court case, they found that it only exists for a short period of time after playing the game. So it's like, I'm not even sure we've got an argument anymore. People get hyped up playing by the games, and then they're done being hyped up, a few minutes afterwards. I'm not sure that anybody would dispute that. I would imagine that anybody playing any kind of game probably, forget whether or not it's a video game, you get a little anxious playing Trivial Pursuit or Monopoly. And how many of you ever played Monopoly and have seen people's tension level rise while you're playing the game? That kind of thing. But it's like, does that make them aggressive people? That's the argument that you're making, and even your own evidence seems to be very mild in comparison on those points. So it's a little underwhelming on the proof, but it was easy to follow and listen to, and I can see what the claim was. So that, and like I said, you're doing a pretty good job citing evidence. I just think you need better evidence. Okay.